All right, welcome everyone. Thank you all for your time and your interest. And before we start, I want to acknowledge the land we're currently on. It's important that we note the state of Minnesota, which includes the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, is a traditional homeland of the Dakota Nation. Currently, there are 4 Dakota and 7 Ojibwe tribal nations, reservations, and communities. We're located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of indigenous people. The university resides on Dakota land ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. The Asia Pacific American Resource Center, APARC, believes it is important for us as an AAPI community, especially me as a small person, to understand and acknowledge that we occupy land that has been forcibly taken or occupied by others, much like the history of many of our own AAPI homelands. As a community that calls this land home, we must understand our own role in contributing to the ongoing occupation of this land and work to recognize and maintain this land for indigenous communities, my neighbors, that first called it home. So I am Syra. I am your host facilitator for today. I identify as a Southeast Asian female, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm also a student at the U PhD program in culture and teaching. And I'm glad that I'm here with these beautiful people. And before we actually start though, I want to make sure that everyone's comfortable. Feel free to grab appetizers. There are definitely feedback forms for you to share and provide feedback in addition to sticky notes and pens. If you have any questions for panelists in particular or overall in general. All right. Okay. Thank you so much. As we navigate tonight, I want to know that this is a formal, informal, and intimate panel. When we are sharing narratives and we're speaking our specific truth, I want us to encourage listening as well as participation. So if you have anything, please again, feel free to share. And those who are with us virtually, we do have someone who is watching the chat. So if you have any questions, please feel free to share that in the chat box as well. So I might not do justice. So instead, I'm going to have each one of you panelists share your name, share what you identify with, as well as your role in the education system, in no particular order. So
well, I can start. My name is Arianna Crosby. I identify as a Black American. And I am a school counselor in a high school. You looked at me so my bad. My name is Thandeka Chiinze. I identify, my goodness, it's changed recently too and all over, but currently I identify as Pan-African. And that's purposeful, just as my own existence within 2 different roles that I have to cross and intersect in. What else about me? I am, oh my goodness, Achievement Integration Program Manager. What else was I supposed to say? That's it. That's it.
I am David Keck. I identify as Asian American male. I am a climate and culture specialist at a high school.
I'm named Beulah. I identify, I haven't thought about this. I identify as a multi-race, but African-American male. I'm an associate principal at White Bear Lake High School.
My name is Andrea Vargas Mungaray. I am Hispanic and Latina, and I'm actually a student here at the U. So I'm an undergrad student and I'm majoring in mathematics.
all right. Thank you. And again, I appreciate you all being here with us today. So the first couple of questions, we're going to have each individual share. Okay. Then after that, we'll provide space where people can ask specific questions to specific individuals. Okay. So for the first round, the question is, what was your pathway that got you into the education field? And in no particular order. So what was your pathway that got you into the education field? Because we want to make sure we provide the specific truth, right? And so what that looked like for you as far as which you majored in, your personal experience with the education system. Please feel free to share.
I'll start since I went last. I started off working with children, so my interest was really in like early childcare, and particularly like a more holistic approach to education. So I started working in like Montessori's, which are more child guided. So that was like my beginning, especially not having had any people of color as teachers in my youth. So I grew up in like white suburbs. So I think mine was really just coming at it from a perspective of like a holistic education and really offering that education to people who need it and might not have as much access to it. So for me, it was more of like a, I don't know, like an equitable approach to education, and math just seemed like a good vehicle for it. That's me.
Going this way. For myself, I grew up in North Minneapolis and I have 18 siblings. I never really had a good experience in school growing up. I think I was kicked out of 5 schools in 1 year. Lot of trauma and things like that, but every time I open my books, I never seen anybody look like me. So I couldn't identify with the curriculum that was being taught. So I never was able to engage. I had one black teacher who was a Fayed teacher, but I never seen a black principal until maybe I was 28, 29. And so now I have 33 nieces and nephews. And so I wanted to fill a void. And so I wanted to be able to allow our kids to be able to see me and see possibility and kind of turn their dream machine on, so to speak, and be everything for them that I didn't feel like I had in education, which was not much. And so here we are, just trying to create impact every day, one kid at a time.
I would like to share, so let's go back all the way to childhood. I did go to school system in Minnesota. That was overwhelmingly a PWI. So the experience I had as far as traumatization, terrorization, the stigmatization of our white systems, structures, institutions, where I couldn't unpack those things, or what I was going through, what I was feeling, what I was thinking, what I was experiencing. And then that propelled me as I grew older. I'm going to admit I did take a atypical path by way of serendipity. I had a brother-in-law who identifies as a Black American, who worked in K-12 public education, who repeatedly exposed me to the idea of considering working in education. And then that engendered me to explore the Venn diagram of, you know, what am I good at? What makes a difference? What gives me joy? And I found that when I stepped foot in a school district, and I never looked back since.
Mine, I guess my path to education, I don't even know where to start. Also, it was serendipitous as well. Honestly, for real, when I think back to it, it was just, to me, grace and just folks that needed to be in my life being in my life when I didn't even realize it. So I started as actually an assistant cultural liaison in high school. And that was my first introduction to anything education. And to be honest with you, I was used to think like education is just a step. I'm gonna be up in there, I'm gonna be out, and I'm gonna get my doctor degree, whatever doctor my parents wanted to be, because I'm African. And if y'all don't know nothing about Africans, you got 3 jobs, either something with finance, something with medicine, or something with engineering. And so that was all that I had heard all my life, and that's what I was going to pursue. This was just a job to make ends meet. But I enjoyed it. I naturally just loved learning about different cultures and being inclusive, and I just gravitated to it. So I go to college, same thing. All my actual scholarships, when I think back to it, were all education scholarships, though I was in psychology. Like, and people kept telling me, you should be in education. But I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not about to do what y'all do. And long story short, opportunities just came up, and I went into different sectors within education, whether it was literacy, but always centered around equity. And so when I had the opportunity to join a department centered in, well, what I thought was centered in equity, right after grad school, it really opened my eyes to my own identity, my own journey, and how I would want education to look like and feel like for my students, particularly when I think about immigrant students that are between worlds, those in the diaspora, that just don't fit as being really Zimbabwean, which I'm Zimbabwean, or really being like necessarily American and just figuring out your own journey. I wanted to create a space where they can authentically come out and be themselves and be okay with that, right? Regardless of those norms. And so became an equity specialist, and that was it. I fell in love. I have not went back, will not go back. I don't pay too much money in these schools to go back. And yeah, and I just keep trying to figure out other ways to make our schools equitable and make sure that our voices are heard. And when I say our, I'm talking about those of the global majority, right? Those of us that are a majority, but usually are the minority at the tables where decisions are made for us. Yeah. Okay.
All right, so my journey to education, I did not grow up thinking I wanted to be in education. I wanted to be a doctor. I went into college to be a pediatrician. Organic chemistry came up, you know, I was like, ooh, that was not hard. And then I got into the world of public health, and I've always just kind of been a person that wants to help others, but mostly youth, children, young adults. So really, I graduated with my degree in psychology. Wanted to go to grad school for public health, that didn't work out. And then I ended up just finding jobs like with children, young people. So I started with the Girl Scouts, and then I moved to the Annex Teen Clinic. So every job I had was with working with kids, and it really just, it's like a passion of mine where it just came naturally. Like, I really enjoy working with this population. I can see myself helping them, because growing up, I grew up in a house of educators. My mother was a social worker. Her mother was a music teacher. She was the only Black music teacher in Columbus, Georgia at the time. My dad worked in sales, but he did a lot of things in the community, such as mentoring and things like that. So I looked at them as, we help people. This is kind of our passion. This is what my family does. So I grew up with that mindset. So when I was working in these other organizations, and then I ended up in the education field as an equity specialist, where I met these 2 women. And it just, like Ms. Thandeka said, like it opened up my mind of who I was growing up, because I didn't get a chance to really think about it as I was in that process. It took me going to an HBCU to kind of really realize who I am as a Black woman in America. And then it just made me realize how much kids need to see that representation in their schools. My high school, mostly white, I was the only Black girl in my AP classes, all the activities I did. And that's hard. So I just really wanted to come back into education as an equity specialist. I just realized there's so much more that youth go through as well. And that's when I went back to get my master's in school counseling, so I could be that voice and that person in my building.
Thank you. What about you, Shane? Okay, I'm gonna capture this in real quick. So I wanted initially to be a creative writing teacher because I wanted to have an outlet in the education system where you're able to be yourself and be creative, as well as receive credit for it. I ended up majoring in secondary education, minor in Spanish. I started off as part of the intervention team in a school district. And then I went back to get my literacy education. And then from there on, I actually was part of the achievement and integration department, doing equity work. And since then, I've been just dedicated to it. And I think for me, even though it started off as a classroom, I think that's because that's all I knew. And when you think of things of what people knew beforehand, right? I'm like, what they call it first or 1.5 generation. So, you know, I was the first kid who went through the whole charge system, right? So my parents only knew what they knew. And my dad said, don't be a fashion designer. So I said, okay, I said a teacher or a nurse. And I said, creative writing teacher, cool. So even understanding and navigating that for better understanding, right? I realized, oh, you don't have to be in a classroom. There are different ways, different opportunities for you to be in the education field and support students. And that's where I found that education achievement department, or specifically as an educational equity specialist, that was kind of like my whole passion and my thing. Thank you for the time. Okay, for the second question, in no particular order, right? Why do you personally and professionally think BIPOC representation is needed in the field? And then I'm going to add an additional question to that because it was a question that a participant wanted to also hear. So in addition to you thinking or you sharing why you think personally and professionally BIPOC educators should be represented in the field, explain the different difficulties you might have faced.
I guess why BIPOC representation matters in the education field is one, education system wasn't built for people that look like us. So as a student, you have to go through the system that isn't built for you. And then you also have people that don't look like you. It's very, very tough. I happened to work in the building that I graduated from. So 15, 20 years ago, the population was really different student-wise. And has changed drastically. So we're now about like 50% students of color. But our staff hasn't changed. So it's just we need to see people that look like us in all areas, and not because of you can't make relationships with people that don't look like you, but it's just a comfortability when a student's like, oh, she got braids, I can go talk to her, or like, I don't know how many conversations come up just about like my hair. Like it's just different things where like you can see yourself in an adult person that's able to still support you in the education part. Or if you are a student that's facing difficulties in the classroom and you feel like because of your race, like who do I go to? Someone that doesn't look like me, and that can be very difficult. And even though I might not be able to change anything within the classroom, and we're trying to, you know, as systems and equity departments are trying to change that, but at least you can come and talk to me about it, or we can problem solve and I can help you navigate, because that's not the only time, because as people of color, we deal with that throughout life. And it's just good as an educator to be there for the students. And I think in my equity role before I was a counselor, staff were threatened by that a little bit. Cause like, oh, why are all these kids coming to you? Why are they hanging out in your room? It's like, well, it feels like a safe space to them. And I want to be able to provide that. So there is difficulty being a person of color in the education system, because like we're all here right now, but there might not be this many of us in one building. So you're also kind of navigating that role as an adult and a staff person. I might be the one or a few in my building trying to make change or be there for students. So it's interesting.
I think it's important to recognize and identify the fact that from one corner of the earth to the other parts of the world, since the beginning of time, we've always been kings and queens. So we're powerful by nature as people of color. And in this country within itself, the demographic is changing. This isn't 1700s or 1800s where it was, 90-10 as far as percentage. Like in the next 20 years, I think there'll be more people of color in this country than there will be white people. However, in positions of leadership, it's probably 90-10, if that. Whenever, speaking for myself, whenever I go into these meetings, as an administrator, as a leader in education, when I go into these meetings, I'm usually the only person of color in there. And that doesn't feel good. But I'm blessed to be there. And I try to reach back and open up doors and provide inspiration and empower other people to do the same and get in these rooms. Because that's the only way the kids are going to see it, that it's possible, is if they see us in positions of leadership. And not always the students, but the teachers, the principals, the superintendents, and things like that. Because that's where we should be. But in talking about that, I always feel like I have to prove that I can be in these rooms. And I know personally, if I couldn't be there, I wouldn't be here. And I'm usually one of the most educated people in those rooms. However, we're not treated as such. But there's power in numbers. And so if there's 10 people in that meeting and there's only one of me, well, what happens to that meeting if there's 5 of us, there's 6 of us? And that's what it should look like, because that's what our classrooms look like now.
Right.
Even in like a place where I work at in White Bear Lake, we're like 30% students of color, but our elementary schools are 50%. So the demographic is changing, and we have to reflect that. We have to mirror that within our buildings, within our classrooms. And it can't just be support staff all the time. You go to school in Minneapolis and there's a lot more kids of color, but there's still not a lot of teachers and principals and superintendents of color. And so I think it's really important for us to take a chance on ourselves and push one another instead of being crabs in a barrel. But the barriers that we face are, there's barriers every day. It's hard. There's a difference between equity and equality. And equality has never been given to people that look like us. Neither is equity. But we can force the issue once we have power in numbers. And so if we got to sit in these classrooms and get the seat time and get the credentials and grab the papers, then that's what we got to do. But each one teach one, and we got to hold each other accountable for doing that. And I think once we do that, then there will be no need for a panel, because we'll get back to being kings and queens and running the world like we should be. And I think we got a lot of young leaders, and we're on the way. Progress is slow, but I think we're moving in the right direction. That was a little long-winded, sorry.
I'm gonna go, excuse me, I'm gonna go next, and it's hard to follow up to that one.
You how it feels?
Wow. All right, I'm gonna start with this. We love children because they are closest to their humanity. So the question I raise, why, when we become adults, we're further away from our humanity? One theory I would offer to consider. Many people of color often talk about the work and unlearning they have to do to move closer to who they truly are, to their culture, and most importantly, their humanity. And we've fully been institutionalized by these systems and structures. That's the result of that, right? I look here at the in-person audience right now, and I see myself in all of you. One thing I would offer to you all is to become dissatisfied with just being a thermometer. I hope at some point you become inspired to be a thermostat, right? Because a thermostat shapes and molds how people see the world, how people view the world, the climate of opinion. And that truth, I don't know if everyone is ready for that truth, but please give that to them anyway. Speak truth to power. Another thing I would add in regards to the second part of that question, one of the challenges I see is the white dominant culture, right? And someone may ask, well, Mr. Cat, why would you point that out? You don't dismantle white supremacy by learning about other cultures. You do it by deconstructing whiteness, period. If we're living in a society which is post-genocide, settler colonialism, why does whiteness continue to be the dominant culture? Right. And as long as there's an achievement disparity or an achievement gap, one's identity characteristics should not predict those outcomes. And I encourage all of you to commit to the quest of questioning, but also be open to receiving as well. Because if you don't challenge what is normal, right? What is standard, what is proper, what is appropriate, you're left to the default, right? Which is cis, het, white, Christian, male, right? And when I say Christian, let's be even more precise. I'm talking about indoctrination of a bastardized Western version of Christianity. So many of us have to suppress our true authentic selves because of our 3 E's that we face, right? I say that a lot. All of us are made of our 3 E's, our experience, our exposures, and our environments. And just imagine that shaping and molding and guiding our view of the world 24/7. What does it look like for you? What does it look like for me? And that is beyond just the representational value of me being in a school district and looking like you all, right? I have to be able to share, connect with those 3 E's so that you all, so I hope you all one day have a seat at the table, just like I'm trying to fight for, right? Because we, as a whole society, we become more progressive, more creative, more just when we got diverse backgrounds at a seat at the table, right? Because different experiences and different backgrounds raise different questions. You need that. So I'll stop there. I took a lot of time. And we got some other brilliant panelists here.
I think just like in a sentence, I feel like listening to everyone's answers and testimonies and understanding of their own experiences and the importance of them just like tells me that I'm in the right place and going in the right direction. Yeah, I think so many times we are mirrors for students and for young people, and like being that opportunity model, being there to offer this insight and this new experience and this different way of looking at education and understanding education is so important. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like my answer is kind of lame, but I think just the reason why I feel like BIPOC educators are so important is because so many of us have that, like, it's like we have all of these different experiences and we also are all having the same experience of not seeing ourselves in our educators, not seeing ourselves in our school community. And I think like BIPOC people more than anything understand the interconnectedness of our home lives and our community and our education and how that affects us. We are insiders to our lives that are so often being ruled by outsiders. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's like having the gall and the persistence to go through an education system that we know is so traumatizing to our youth and to us. And still being able to do it and feeling empowered to do it because you love it, because you understand the importance of it, despite the fact that it's going to be difficult. But it's really hard work, and I think the hardest work is often what is the most worth it.
So I don't know, I think there's many ways, and everybody's kind of spoken about why representation matters at the very basics. Like when I think about Syra Hammock, right? And she talks about culture, she talks about culture tree, like surface, you know, deep, etc. Right? At the very most, like we know there's a comfort that comes, like Miss Arianna talked about, right? We're just seeing somebody that looks like you, right? People are naturally drawn to people that they assume look like them and may share similar experiences. We know that babies can tell that within like 3 months, okay? So like that's just a natural instinct, right? What I think is important to note, as all the other panelists have spoken about, is those experience, right? My personal local and immediate that I'm able to bring as a Pan-African, I don't even know as I'm saying first, I don't know where I'm at, first, second, whatever generation, with all these different experiences that I bring, right? With just how I've walked this world and I've seen this world, and this world has shaped me as a woman of color, right? It's important to note that as much as all my other intersectionalities count, and they absolutely count, when I think about this nation and the importance of race and how it has to be connected to all those other intersectionalities in this country, like that will definitely shape how I'm able to voice things at a table, right? And I think what's sad for me being in education is, as long as I have, and I feel it's almost like an imposter saying that, right? Because there's an aspect of like as a quote unquote professional and then as a student, and both of those you have to separate, but to me they're all connected, because I feel like I'm treated most times as my students of color. Like I don't not only see myself, I don't really feel empowered, right? I feel almost sometimes tokenized and or a check mark, right? In most spaces that I walk in, right? And when I question, I'm seen as an opposer, and not really like somebody of like challenge brings growth to me. Like you don't grow until you feel like, oh my goodness, there's some resistance, right? But in just asking things that I think my experiences allowed me to feel and to see and to be able to bring a different perspective, I think most times because of this word equity, because I'm always talking about equity, folks see me as an outsider, right? And when I say folks, I'm just going to be very blunt. I'm talking about my white colleagues. Our education is 95, 94, whatever you want to call it, in the 90s, right? % white staff. And that's not necessarily an issue if it were really like, how do I say this? It wouldn't be necessarily an issue if the norm was, I don't even know, it is an issue. There's no way to kind of make it pretty. There's no way. I'm sorry, I was trying. There's no way to make it pretty. It's an issue, right? That means my kid, and my Tony is definitely some years older, younger than mama. Like he is seeing the same type of education that I saw. There's no growth. There's not been growth in education for such a long time, and we're okay with it. Like folks are just, right? And then the few folks that you usually see, which in my personal local and immediate experience, have been people of color, BIPOC communities, Indigenous folks that are in education. They're usually pushing that, right? Like, since the 1900s, like maybe we really should rethink the education. And people are like, oh my goodness, we've always done this way. But it's like there's an achievement debt, a debt, right? A gap makes it seem like it just came out of nowhere and then a grab, there's like a grab is just nowhere and then we can just fix it. No, there's a debt you owe for specific communities like difference, right? Difference in your teaching, difference in your policy, difference, most importantly in your practice. It's an all. And so it's frustrating for me because it doesn't matter what level I've been in, to be honest with you. I've been an aide, I've been an administrator, I've been an equity specialist, support, I've been in all different capacities. And it's really hard to stay hopeful in this work. And I'm just speaking my truth right now, because in all of those capacities, I feel like I'm always pushing for the same basic need. It's the basic need, right? It's the basic need of like, see and do right by us, do right by these communities. And to even say these is an othering, right? The fact that I have to do that, the fact that my position has to exist, like that in itself, to navigate that is so frustrating for me. Because I realize my position that exists because this debt that still won't be met, and even our policies and statutes really create the space for this position to be safe, because they know, they being legislation knows that this position is not really going to address the root cause of the issue. And it's quite frustrating being in spaces like that, right? Of carrying that around and then being told to meet people where they are. And when we say meet people where they are, we're really talking about our white audience. It's usually not. And then usually it's being very kind. 99.9%, like your pregnancy test, is usually for white folks. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating. I have to sit in a position of like teaching you stuff that I'm like, come on now. You know, I have to teach you, I have to hold your hand, then I have to go home and sit with that. Or have to put the burden and the onus on my other BIPOC community to help me unload and unpack all of that. It's really fatiguing, to be honest with y'all. So I am very much in my believing quadrant about this work. I have to be, because I've got kids, I've got family, and family is just not my own nucleus. Like this is family, right? But I wish I was not in a position where that would need to be. I wish it was just normalized to be different. And that difference is what is a normal way of a protocol of engaging in how we make things and communities and systems work for all. And until we do that, like you said, Mr. Keck, we're gonna continue existing and we're gonna continue having different equity folks and managers and whatever. And it's gonna stay the same.
Ms. Yang, if I could add real quick, because great points. So my favorite writer all time is James Baldwin. And he says, see if I get this right. Not everything that's faced will be changed, but nothing will change until it's faced. And so I think for those of you guys who are looking into going into education, and for us as a panel of leaders too, I think we're in a really interesting time though, where we got this window right now as people of color where, and especially as young people, like we can all tear down and recreate what education looks like, what it is, from the curriculum to the learning spaces, to the buildings that our kids learn in, to the teachers that are in front of them, all of these different things. But we have to be unafraid. We have to be unafraid to be able to fall, understanding that, yeah, you're going to fall. But if there's enough of us, we'll never fail. And so it's okay to fall. You should fall. You're going to fail more in life than you succeed, but you only got to get it right once. And if we can recreate what education looks like, feels like, and is for the next 10 generations, if we can start that work and do that, then I think while this window is open, because this window for us is going to close at some point, unless we recreate what this education thing is. But our books, our texts, our curriculum, it can include us, but it won't include us until we're unafraid to change it. Until we're unafraid to fill the voids and tear down what was and recreate anew. And I really feel like in the next 10, 20 years, as we lead and go, so the world shall follow, especially when it comes to this education thing. But we gotta have young leaders that are willing to take the bumps and lumps and that are willing to fall and understand that we won't let you fail. And it's just important. It's important to get out here and really do the work. So I challenge you guys to do that. And when you do it, know that there's a generation of people that came before you, which is us, that'll also hold you up and have your back.
Can I ask, this is for anyone, but specifically you as an administrator?
Mhm.
One of the questions that, participant had questioned or wanted me to provide in space, is what are the areas with the least amount of BIPOC? I'm going to kind of tweak that question and ask you as an administrator, what areas would you like to see more BIPOC in, knowing that the education system is very large?
What do you mean by areas?
Any area within
Sectors,
the.
divisions.
Mhm.
All over,
Right. and I-
Yeah. all over from our classrooms to people that are leading our districts. However, I really think it's vital that we have people at the top. Because until we get people at the top that are at these tables where people are creating policy, you know, we got a lot of people that are making decisions about what goes on in schools that aren't in schools. And they're not in the schools. They're 20 years removed from a building. But they're making judgments and decisions about what our kids see, how they feel. You can't tell me if our kids feel like they belong if you never stepped in the building. And so I really think we gotta have more BIPOC representation at these tables where the decisions are being made. Because there's a trickle down effect. And when we get people at the table where decisions are made, then these decisions and these outcomes will be different. The achievement gap, that'll dissipate. But we have to have people at these tables where decisions are being made. And then we can reach back. We can open the door. But, you know, and we got to empower people that are in the buildings as teachers. We got to empower them to move forward. And then they can reach back and pull somebody else up. That's the only way it gets done. That's the only way it gets done. We got to be unselfish. And we gotta dare to be great.
You know, a word that he said, can I just speak on the word unselfish? Because I love that we want to pull each other up. I think that's great. We in our communities, I think, from my personal local experience, local and immediate, have a great way of pulling each other up and being resilient. And if you look at the history of this nation, it's the same old continuum, right? At what point will our white counterparts and white systems stop being selfish? And at what point, right? Because here's the reality, right? Mr. Beulah, what I've seen in my personal local and immediate, I have seen where it's been a staff predominantly for people of color in leadership that are so ingrained in systems of whiteness that they can't begin to imagine what it will be like to not even have to prescribe to it to be called successful. I've seen that and it's hurt me to the core, right? Like it really was so disheartening to see that, because it made me realize, like, man, I can be a perpetuator of this thing, right? It was disheartening, but it was a great lesson. But then I also say many of the times as the BIPOC community, we want to tell each other to like, hey, you know, like you got to be at this table, you got to do this, you got to push, and that's awesome, we do. But at some point, do we put the onus also on our white colleagues to say, hey, you got to move out of that position or want to partner with me in this position if you truly are about all? Because when we say all, especially in our districts, what I've noticed that is a cold word, truly still for white supremacy. All to me, it means that because it ends up never being able to trickle down to our students of color. It doesn't. And I dare anyone to give me data that shows that all has ever trickled down to people of color and indigenous folks. I want to see it because we always get surface level initiatives. And surface when it's like putting a Band-Aid, right? And I'm out here bleeding like, dang, you like I've been stabbed and oh, let's just put a Band-Aid. No, I'm gonna need you to do some surgery. I'm gonna need you, Thandeka, to rethink ways and different ways to like remedy this situation. And when I even like invite folks to say, let's just be vulnerable about education. To even say, you know what, I don't know. People are so afraid to just do that. And that buckles my mind because then we want our students to be like, oh, we're teaching you emotional regulation. Huh? But you are so built and set in control that you can't even begin to model that for me. And so I get it, and I want us, of course, to be always at the table, but until folks are also willing to say, I've been at this table for 40 years, maybe let's let Beulah come in. Let me maybe step back, maybe Beulah has some ideas from his perspective, from his experience, that will allow me to see things differently. It don't matter how many degrees I don't got, y'all, and I don't have some, right? I don't went to school now, paid this PWI some money. I'm still regarded the same way as my students are.
And I agree with you, and I think our white counterparts have to come to the table. However, in my experience, in my conversation with my father, my grandmother, and what she talked to her grandmother about, you know, they've been waiting on this for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And so, like, yes, it'd be nice, and I think there are a few of our white counterparts that do come to the table, but I'm not gonna wait on them. I'm gonna force the issue. I'm gonna kick the door down. I don't need the key. I can, because they'll give us some solutions, but we're the answer. You know what I mean? And so I think it's so important for us to, yes, push them to have empathy and not sympathy,
Right.
understand where we're coming from and come to the table and help us push us forward. However, I'm just tired of waiting on them. So if I'm tired of waiting on them, I gotta kick the door down. You know?
So are we okay to say that we kick any door down within the school system? To create a space? Because if we mentioned at the top, right? But if there's so many doors, from what we shared, we're not in all these spaces. Are we saying any doors?
It's survival to me at this point. Yeah, I gotta kick down doors by force. You know, like, yeah, by force, by fire. Like, there's no other way. Unfortunately, it has to get to the point of that. I wish it wouldn't. Like, I think nobody wants to be, most people aren't really like, I wanna be in conflict. I wanna have people feel uncomfortable, right? But nothing's gonna change until folks definitely feel discomfort. And that means I have to knock a door down and be like, hey, I'm hurt. And they're like, oh my goodness, what's hurt? And then I have to explain all that again. But like I'm saying, like, you just have to, that's part of, I think, as a person of color, work in an Indigenous person. Unfortunately, that's part of the role as an educator. Like, you can either sit to, and just sit there and in silence, and to be honest, you perpetuate the system, or you have to knock the door down. And I would even say that, to be honest, I think our white counterparts need that same message. Because sometimes when we talk about equity, it seems like, oh no, that's a people of color, that's a BIPOC issue, or we don't touch that. But it's like, no, you're definitely somebody who is getting privilege from this. So, until you kind of be like, oh girl, we can actually share this. And we all think there needs to be that teaching too. And that guilt needs to, we all got guilt. Everybody has carried something, done something there about it. We need to stop with the guilt.
That privilege is powerful. But I would, and Ms. Yang, you and I have talked about this before. And I truly believe in this is to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And so it's like some of my white constituents will be like, I know I can see it, I can feel it in what they say. I want you to win, Nate. I want you to have opportunity, so long as it doesn't come at the cost of me giving up some of this privilege. But that privilege should have been part of what you got, should have always been mine. Like, I'm white, black, and native. So I'm the person that owns this land. I am the slave owner and the slave. You know what I mean? And so I need that. And you got to be okay with giving some of that privilege up. Because I don't really care about your oppression, because I've always been subjugated. And my people have. And when I say my people, I'm not just talking about black people. I'm talking about everybody on this panel. Because if we all took a trip and we went over to the UK right now, right? If we're sitting there, they're not gonna, and me and Syra go over there, and they're not gonna identify her as Asian and me, Black, they're gonna identify us as American. They identify themselves as Polish, you know, Scandinavian, wherever they're from. Only in America do we identify each other by color, but that's the system. And it took a long time to build that system, and it's gonna take a minute to break it. But we gotta be unafraid. And I'm all right with that. And these people up here are unafraid. Miss Yang is unafraid. And I love it. I'm gonna be quiet now because I'm kind of in my zone now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, actually, I thank you all speaking your truth. Thank you. You know, we covered different areas, and that's why I wanted it to be informal and right, because so many things and so many questions, but at the same time, it's also interrelated as well. When we're talking about BIPOC individuals in this education system that was not made for BIPOC. But I want us to pause for a second, and instead of me asking, you know, questions that I have, open it to the floor, virtually as well as physically. If there are any questions or any clarifying things that you would like to ask any one of the panelists or overall in general, please feel free. And if not, okay.
I have a question. So when you said to like get BIPOC people like that, to like superintendents, principals, that kind of thing. Like, do you feel like sometimes they do like great things to get there, but then when they're there, they kind of fall into it to stay there? Like, you know, they can get used to like the money or just having a job security, and then like how would you? I don't know, like, do you feel like that's what happens? And like they can do these great things to get there, and then they're there, and it's just like, well, now I'm here, I don't have anywhere. Excuse me, it's nowhere to go, or like, how to play. I don't know.
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think comfort is dangerous. Comfort is dangerous. And so like, what I do to combat that comfort, I can't speak for everybody, but for myself, in a position of leadership, what I do to combat that comfort so I don't get too comfortable is I always want to have a higher purpose. So like, for instance, moving into this summer, I knew we were going to do a lot of hiring, right? But I wanted to be in control of that because I felt like I knew what we needed. And so to combat that comfort, I could have just sat through the summer and just kind of chilled, you know, and waited for the next year. But I didn't want to do that. And so I said, well, what can I create? What can I do that's going to be impactful? And so just in our building, we've doubled the staff of color in our building just this summer. As far as the behavior model, it's been in place since 1984. We changed that. I was empowered to change it, but I wasn't given the blueprint to change it. You know what I mean? So they're like, okay, go ahead. Like, we'll empower you to change that. We believe in you. There ain't no blueprint though, because it's been there since 84. So I had to recreate that with my team. We had to recreate that, what that looks like, so that at our school, the APs weren't just holed up in the office doing behavior. I needed to be available for staff and visible for kids. Because if they don't see me, they don't know it's possible. They just see this Black dude in the office doing all the discipline. And I didn't want to be that person. I didn't come here to be the disciplinary. I came here to create change, fill voids, and change systems. And so, to answer your question, that's the way this year that I've combated that comfort. And it's hard as work. It's hard work. And most people won't try to do it. But I had a great team though, and we spent a lot of hours trying to figure out what that would look like. And even now, so I was able to open up some doors for some people and put some people in place that look like us to do some of the work and empower them to make some leadership decisions on a day-to-day. And so now I get to watch people that used to kind of meander through the day. I get to watch people glow and watch people feel empowered to make decisions. They'll ask questions, but I love seeing it. And so now I'm challenged with, okay, now, how can I perfect this system so that it's here for the next 30 years, the same way that old one was, that didn't work? And now what do I do with that? What other voids can I fill? Now, so we've doubled it, but we got 50% students of color in our elementary schools. So we got to do better by the time they get there. And so how do we do that? And so now that'll be my challenge to battle that comfort. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
It is easy to get comfortable though. Especially when, like, if you go from a teacher that's making, let's say 60 bands, right? 60,000, right? That's all right as a teacher for real, right?
Barely, girl, I'll be real.
You know what I mean? But if you go from that and then people don't understand, you can live a good life in education too, though. Like, so you go from that and then you go to an administrator making 150, right? It's easy to be like, look, I'm just gonna coast, man, and I'm gonna collect this check every week. I ain't gonna make no waves. I'm gonna create job security for myself by just shaking hands and kissing babies. That's cute, and you can do that. And people will do that for 25 years and get their pension and whatever, but they didn't change anything. They didn't create any impact. And they didn't inspire anybody. Yes,
I
ma'am.
have like, I don't really know what this is. But like, so I feel like personally, in order to like a great principal or like more from Lucy Lane or like, and just to like be a great, like to actually do something and to like, we need to be in the classroom first.
Yep.
How do you? I mean, obviously, you know, encourage like more BIPOC, but how do you get them in the classroom so they can have that experience, not just like they read about it or just, you know, I was in school like they taught or they've seen the curriculum, and then get them to spend enough time to actually understand it and not just like, oh, okay, I spent 2 years, like I totally got it. And 20 years later, they're still trying to be like, it's no, it's different classroom. Like, how do you get that kind of like constant, like line almost of just like, yes, they spend enough time in the classroom, but like also they can go be principals or superintendents or, you know, be in charge of curriculums and actually do something without being without being so far away.
Yeah, I think for me, it's when I see people that have a ton of potential, and me and Ms. Yang have had this conversation, and I'm trying to push her now. But I think for me, I gotta have a sense of urgency and not allow that comfort to set in. You know what I mean? Because if I'm sitting with this brother and he's a great teacher, that's cool. But if I know that he'd be a great principal from the work that I do, I want to grab him and be like, hey, look, I understand you're a good teacher. That's dope. However, we need you to push. And let me get you in this program. Here's the steps. I'll walk with you through it. You know what I mean? Because this is what our white constituents been doing for, you know, years and hundreds of years. They've been helping each other. They've been pushing one another. And so it's almost, I'm complicit if I see him and he's a great teacher and I allow him to be satisfied with just that. I, as a leader, have to have a sense of urgency enough to be like, that's great. And it's not enough. Because we, as a collective, need to push you. Because I see a ton of potential in you. I see a ton of potential in Ms. Yang. So if I don't have a sense of urgency to push her to where maybe she doesn't even see it, if I think she'll be a great superintendent or a great principal, and I push her and then she is, well, then what? Then that empowers her to push the next person, so on and so forth, that, you know, factory line, so to speak. But like, if we want people at the table, the people that are already at the table have to have a sense of urgency and help. I can't just sit there and be solid and okay with you being good at one thing. I need you to be great. If that makes sense.
I'm gonna also add to that. So when we think of pushing people, right, you can start from the classroom, you can start from traditional positions, and it's important to know that within the education system, there's different things. So for example, if you're like, hey, you know what, I don't want to be an administrator. Well, know that if you're in the classroom, you're great at it, you could also be the director of curriculum.
Right,
Facts.
exactly.
You know, you could be the director of these other departments that he's doing, you know, and or honestly, you could be creative and create a department that supports whatever we need to, you know, kind of like what you said, like right now, there are definitely different opportunities, right? So we think of leveling up or going up or just different leadership positions, right? Not minimizing education, being in the
Teachers,
classroom. We're
right.
not minimizing that at all, because
Right.
that's
Oh my
you
goodness.
and 20-something plus individuals that you are able to impact.
Every day.
Okay, that is a leadership position, okay, and it also needs to be looked at differently as well, but that's a different story. But understanding that there are other positions such as director positions, such as administrators, right? All these other things that are definitely needed as well, that can stem from being in these other positions that maybe you first had entered into the education.
And then you pull up that seat at the table. You got a seat at the table. You just at a different lane. But it's just as important. It's just as important. That's a great question.
And can I actually add that not everyone that's been in the classroom actually should be in leadership?
Facts.
And so, no shade intended, you know, I'm a big believer that everybody fits in the circle, but you know, everybody is their different niche in the circle. You know what I'm saying? Like you come in, you make pie, you know, everybody brings apples. If I bring apples, time to go and get you some raw apples. She shouldn't be getting apples from a lot. Okay. And so I'm a big believer that even folks that aren't necessarily a teacher, have been a teacher, can be, right? With the proper opportunity to be in spaces where they can learn from what teaching looks like. So if you keep me in one sector, even though I have the capacity to want to learn, I want to learn, right? But if you keep me just in behavior, then you're gonna keep me in behavior. But if you then open up time to sit at the table or be able to learn from curriculum, to learn from these different sectors, and all of this, to be honest, all these different sectors in education should always be interconnected, always, right? That's what makes good systems, right? And so if I have that, then I should be able to be leadership, because a leader to me is not necessarily one that knows exactly like, oh my goodness, I need to be able to teach 1 + 1, but knows that Beulah knows how to teach 1 + 1. So we need to have Beulah in that, and is able to allocate the resource and designate the resources perfectly and still help those people grow to grow others too. And so I've just learned that because some of these folks, you know, they just need help finding what their niche is. So
I want to acknowledge that we do have a question, and that's virtually. Someone did share, you know, it sounds like being BIPOC in the education space can be hard and draining. How do you regulate in those hard spaces to continue being optimistic for students? Anyone? Okay, anyone besides you? Anyone? So how do we regulate those hard spaces to continue being optimistic for students?
It is hard. And it is draining. I feel like things like this, like re-energize me, like making connections, like if you're interested in education and you want to level up, making these connections with people, like, hey, this is what I'm doing. So you have to like help each other, not only get to these other spaces, but just like make it through day to day. And like also my students like give me a lot of like hope too. Like when you see a kid like break through, or they're actually enjoying school, or just small things like that. It's not small because it's big, but just every little win just adds up. And then on those hard days, you hope to find people if they're not in your building, in your education community, that you can lean on. And it's just taking care of yourself too. Like the world's been crazy the last few years. And just learning like who you are, what you need, how you refill your cups, you're able to give back to your kids, because it's a lot day to day. And like in my counseling role, different things that I see from day to day, between like mental health crises and just all range of things that can be very draining, just the job itself, but then adding on a person of color and the other obstacles you see can be hard, but you have to make connections with people that you trust too. Just learning who in your building you can trust and talk to, and outside of your building, and just knowing what you need as an individual to take care of yourself. So
I just want to share that if you anchor yourself in your why and your purpose, that is a very effective compass. One observation I'll point out right now is that originally I said I was an Asian American male, so I'm going to expand on that further. My father identifies as Chinese and my mother is Cambodian. And the reason why I'm okay saying Asian American, sometimes I go with Asian, I'm conflicted too. And the reason why I'm conflicted is this. If I attach the hyphen American to it, in some ways, it's helpful because it raises the awareness and solidarity amongst the experiences of those groups or Pan-Asian community. When you think about historically in the US as it relates to stereotypes, exclusion, xenophobia, things of that kind. On the other hand, it may not be as helpful because you're talking about a group that makes up 50 countries. So the diversity amongst those groups varies anywhere from socioeconomics all the way to religion. So that's what I would point out. However, long and short of it, Ms. Yang, and I know you feel this way too, when I operate in those spaces, it's not just a job, it's a responsibility. And I try really, really hard to model what it is to be an Asian American male, right? Because many of our students, as well as our teachers and staff and educators, I've had, in my experience, they have shared me, Mr. Keck, this is the first time I've ever had an extensive dialogue with an Asian man, right? Just really, like, when I get that type of response, I know I'm here for a reason. Okay, and I put that hat on every time I step foot in the buildings. And then obviously you talk about your buckets being filled by students. They affirmed that to me, and I did validation as well from them. You know, the impact I've made on their lives, right? The one thing I always say when I got onto education was I wanted to be in this space because I wanted to impact young people's lives. And every building I left, what I found in that process is y'all affected my life. And that's, you know, that's the gift that keeps on giving.
One more question from our participants. Anyone?
I guess I have a question. Okay, as someone who is currently in a PWI, what kind of advice would you give me to like handle like everything like that?
As a student, I would say if you have access to therapy, get a good therapist. And that's like a bare minimum. I think oftentimes it's really easy to get caught up in your own personal struggles and the like storms and the windy days of your own world. And it's really hard to see outside of that. And it's really hard to feel like the world is not like shattering around you. I think especially being a person of color in a primarily white institution like ours, I think it's important to understand yourself and your own like resiliency and what you can manage. Because I feel like so often people of color are used as a sounding board. And they're like, oh, you get it because you've been through this and I'm just gonna word vomit all of my problems at you. And it's hard because I think oftentimes we carry so much of other people's struggles with us. So I would say like understanding yourself and what you need. And also not being afraid to lean on people around you.
You know what, I'll respond to that too. And I say this in a way because being in the education system, when you have learners, right, in a space, sometimes knowing that discomfort is actually good, right? Keep it that. And that might mean challenging yourself as well as others. So you might be around individuals, educators, professionals who might make you feel uncomfortable subconsciously, sometimes, you know, intentionally. It's okay to make them feel uncomfortable. right? I think of Mr. Beulah sharing it, you know, one time saying, I want to see you all being uncomfortable, because that will allow me to know that maybe you're starting to feel the way I feel, right? So I'm not saying that be in that and dwell in that in a way where it's not healthy for you, but understand that it's a process, and also it's okay to also own that in a way where we're looking at it differently as well. Right? I could challenge other people as well if I'm going to be challenged because of the fact of the system that we're in. It should open opportunities for us to challenge each other. So that's, you know, my little response.
I would say, being a small percentage of people of color at this university makes you special. And I think in life, a lot of things are perspective. It's about perspective, the way you look at it, right? There was a stat like 20% or something like that of the country has four-year college degrees. Out of that 20%, 20% of those people are people of color. So just in that alone, we're like in the 5 percentile once you get this degree, right? So that makes you dope in itself, right? But surrounding yourself with good people that you can be a sounding board for, and they can be a sounding board for you, is important. But also understanding you don't ever have to come in here and be perfect. You're not perfect, but you're definitely worth it. You know? And so every day you wake up, just remind yourself of how great you are, because there's so many more people that aren't doing what you are, that aren't doing what you're doing. They aren't making the sacrifices that you're making. They're not sitting in these classrooms. You could be doing something else, but you're here, right? And so you got to remember your greatness every day, because every day you wake up, just being a person of color, that makes you beautiful. That makes you powerful. That makes you great. But look at the work you're doing. You're reaching for something. And it's not just for you. Anytime you do something that's just for yourself, 9 times out of 10, it won't work. But I guarantee when you go to class, you think about your family. When you graduate, who's going to be there? Your people, right? So what you're doing every day is not just for you. And no matter what, that's going to allow you to win. So when you wake up, remind yourself of your greatness, remind yourself of your beauty, and know that you're one of a very few. So that's all right. If it's, I don't know what the percentage here is, but for people of color at this university, but it's a small percentage. But that's a good thing. That's cool, because you are that small percentage, and that makes you just that much better and greater. So just remember your greatness.
Good.
Wait, is there time for one more question?
Time for you. One last question.
Okay, thank you. So I heard Miss Thandi, and I don't know what your name is. You have like the
Some
yeah, what's your name? With the button up, the like orange.
that's the one.
Oh, Nate, yeah.
Okay, so I heard both of you guys, or you people, say something about like feeling like, okay, Miss Thandi, you said like feeling like you're treated as like the kids, like the kids in high school. And then Megan, you said like feeling like you still have to prove yourself like when you're at these meetings with like the higher people. And like, do you feel like there's a way to like not feel like that? Like I feel like I felt like that like just in classes and all the time, and I really don't like it. But I feel like it's like
I think it goes back to what I was telling this young lady. Like, I have to constantly remind myself and surround myself with, most important thing to me is my family. And I was just with my mother earlier, and every time I see them, every time I see my nieces and nephews, I understand that I am the measure in my family. And they look to me for the blueprint. And it's never been created for us. So I'm trying to create it so I can pass it along. But every time I feel like I don't want to do this work no more. Or somebody tries to make me feel less than, it's like a big me, little you. I remind myself by being around my people. I go to those spaces and places where I'm loved. So after I feel like that, I go to the spaces and places where I'm loved, where I'm revered, where I feel like a king. And that fills my cup back up. And if I got people at work that allow me to feel like that, I lean on them, understanding that we have that relationship and they know they can lean on me too. Because that's some of the invisible barriers. But that's part of the system too. It was created to be that way. But that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. I'm reminded of my greatness every time I walk in the hallways and I see those kids look at me and they see possibility. And when they have an issue, they come into my office when they don't have to come there. They seek me out. Because when they come in the office, they see themselves and they know that when I see them, I see me. And so I think when you're in those spaces, in those places where people, for whatever reason, are making you feel like that, or, you know, you got to surround yourself with the people that make you feel like a queen too. And you have to put things, what I did in college is I would put like quotes and stuff on my ceiling. So it's the last thing I see when I go to bed. It's the first thing I see when I wake up. And it reminds me of what my why is. It reminds me of my purpose and that I'm doing this for, this is bigger than just me. The work that you do now is part of your legacy. It's going to be here long after we're all gone. Always remember your greatness.
I'm a person that's in a work in progress with that. I don't want to like sit down front. Listen, I've been very much indoctrinated in assimilation, and it's taken me a very long time to even recognize that. I've had to do a lot of work, Kiana, in like even being able to like to notice it and to try to figure out where it's coming from. So you know how I am, you know, folks know I do my little Becky voice, you know, I do my little whatever. I call it like it is. How you doing, Nate? And so, like, and to be honest, I put humor in it because the reality is that was largely my life, right? And going back to your question of surviving, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name, Ron, the one with the red with the cute outfit on. Like, I survived that in PWIs by being close to like what y'all doing right now. Like, I was largely in MSS, which is Multicultural Student Center, all those things. But in my own life, I call it out like it is. And it took me one of your peers to actually be like, Miss C, you're really good at code switch. And I said, yes, I am. Because my students will be, y'all some great people keeping us accountable. So they'll be like, Miss C, you don't talk differently with these teachers. Now you're talking differently with us. So I'm like, yeah, that's how I've had to survive. That's how I pay the bills. I keep it very 100 about it. But to answer your question, that's part of my experience, right? Like I've told you, I'm a person that's always had to navigate between two different worlds. And I think that's very much my whole life. And instead of being apologetic about it, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. No, like that's part of my story. And that's just who I am. And I've just decided to walk the way I walk and call it like how I call it. And so, I don't know, it took me some time and some work to gather that, and honestly, some real conversations about what privileges I've received from doing that, and what I haven't been able to receive depending on how I show up, and knowing that, and also being able to call it out in the spaces. I identify as an awkward Black girl all the time. I don't mind saying, oh, this is awkward. Oh, how it's tokenized. I'll say it just like that. And you sit with that discomfort and I'll sit with it too. I don't know. It helps me keep me accountable. And two, I've got some dope folks sitting on this panel that are like, oh, girl, is that dashiki Tandi or is that long hair time? And I'll figure that out. Just keeping it 100. I don't know. It's my story.
No, thank you.
Okay, so still 5 minutes left. Okay, keep that in mind. I would like everyone to respond to the last question as we wrap things up. And for those individuals, right, who are considering education, for those individuals who might not thought about education until they entered this panel today, right? what would you say to any of those BIPOC individuals? In no particular order, everyone.
Learn courageous conversations and seek therapy.
As someone who is pursuing education and would like to be in the field, I don't know, I think sometimes it feels really, really easy to just get caught up in like, oh, I'm not doing enough, I'm not making like big enough changes, I'm not doing whatever, but something that might feel really minuscule to you is huge for somebody else, for a young person, for a coworker, for a co-conspirator, for a colleague. It's yeah, people will always remember how you make them feel.
I don't know, I guess since I didn't grow up wanting to be like a teacher or anything, but like hopefully you've heard different roles within education that you could fit in. I think I found my spot with being a school counselor. I knew absolutely I did not want to be in a classroom. I just couldn't do it, but like one-on-one small group of kids, like that's where I'm at. So just learning your strengths and your passions and understanding like your role is major to people, to young people, and it's awesome to see like former students on the screen, and just it's a good place to be because you're needed, and you'll have students and families just like be thankful to see your face because it's crazy. So I mean, there's a spot for everybody, whether you want to be a teacher, administrator, superintendent. And it's super impactful, needed, and it'll definitely help out many students.
I would offer this, and I say this a lot where I'm at, is in any spaces you go, keep in the back of my mind, the goal is not to agree or disagree, but the goal is to gain a deeper understanding. And every time I repeat that in any scenario, I'm reinforced by my experiences. That holds even more true, right? So when I heard Ms. Chiinze talk about her personal story, her personal, local, and immediate, right? It captures all three E's in its full essence. And none of her true authentic self was suppressed there, right? So when issues, conflicts, and challenges arise for other groups and communities that I don't belong to, because I came into contact with one where I seek out to gain a deeper understanding, that allows me the opportunity to be much more empathetic towards the concerns and needs of that group. And I encourage you all to do the same.
As a person that never wanted to be in education, I've never really even liked school. Grown up in extreme poverty. Person that's been shot before, stabbed before, gangbang half my life. Yeah, here we are. What I would say is we need you. And I think education is the foundation of our evolution as a people. And if I can be here and speaking on a panel and be in a position of leadership, and there's no reason that any one of you can't be. If you think about the word impossible, and I know you guys probably heard this before, if you think about the word impossible, within that is I am possible. And I think I can speak for everybody up here when I say you're definitely needed. So come on and understand that you don't have to be perfect. And we got you. So you'll never have to do it alone.
All right. Thank you all, beautiful people here, for being here with us and speaking the truth. And I want to say thank you all for being here as well, dedicating your time and committing to being here with us and virtually as well. We will end our session for today. And you all have a great night, and we look forward to just having further conversations.
Thank you all.
Be blessed.